what I've got is a fork seal that's leaking on the right side after a trip, and so got to replace that, and to do that there's quite a bit of doing to make that happen. So we'll step through that today and hopefully make this informative. With the fender removed and the caliper removed and the wheel removed, we now, to get to the rest of the forks and to these pinch points on the forks that are up here, we've got to take this plastic sort of protection shroud. It is connected with T30. There are two T30s. Let me point at them. There are two T30s, one here and one here. Alright, that's both those out. Now I can see that this is floating and happy to come down. So what we have is we have access to what we need, right, which is these guys here. Right, we've got to have access to these bolts because this is the major pinch point here for the lower portion of the forks. So we've got access to these bolts here and to these bolts here. And that was the point of that operation. Now this guy's hanging on to a bunch of brake line and ABS line, sensor line here, and I don't really want to take that off. I'd rather just have this dangle and reach in there. So that's my plan. We'll see if it works out. For the case where you're actually headed for removing the forks, we will have to, as I mentioned before, remove the ABS sensor cable off of the fork assembly, the additional caliper off of the fork assembly on that side, and this this bit back here that is a brake line, I don't know, meeting point for the brake line getting up and over the wheel, it looks like. Let's remove the ABS. Let's remove the ABS cable. This is no big deal. It's a T30. Alright, so then that cable comes out, and the sensor there is on the end. In some cases, not all, I'm not perfect about it, I will oftentimes take a bolt and put it back into the place where it came from by a few threads, just so that I don't have to worry about losing track of what goes where. On this side, let's do the caliper. This is a T50. Alright, so there you have it, caliper supported. So the other thing I'm going to do that I mentioned is since both calipers are now off at the same time, I'm going to compare these two bolts from the right hand caliper. I'm going to compare them to the left hand caliper and make sure that they're the same size, so that I can mix and match them if needed. And indeed, they are all the same size, so they don't have to be kept separate and apart. The last item for removing everything from the forks is the brake line here, and you'll see that on the back side of this, on the back side here, there's actually a nut. This is also a T30. Piece here wants to slide off. We don't want to nick the fork itself, so you want to spread this carefully and remove it rather than doing it in an ugly way and scratching up the fork, which will cause you lots of trouble later. Alright, so the forks are, I think, free to come out. I think they're free to come out except for the pinch bolts. So the forks are held on here at the lower by these two bolts, and You see this gap here that pinches these guys in place, and so we'll actually spread that with a large screwdriver just a little bit to release that tension. And then they're held on up at the top by the same sort of mechanism, but with only one bolt and a pinch point here. And over on the left hand side, the identical symmetric version of it here. This bolt here that's on the top of both of these forks is going to become very hard to get out once the fork is actually out, right? Because it's going to be hard to hang on to the fork and then to have enough torque to hang on here and have this guy come undone. The top pinch point we'll take off. We'll loosen first. This is a T40. So you want to loosen this and give it some good slop, right? So I've given this quite a bit of slop. I can put more than a couple fingernails in there in between because I'm going to spread this guy with a big screwdriver to release the tension on the top. Same thing on the other side. Give yourself some access, some room. All right, gave myself plenty of room there. All right, so we're back on the left-hand side here, and I'm just going to take a large flat screwdriver and put it in there, and I'm just going to give it a pry. All right, you can see it moving. See the aluminum moving in there. And the idea here is just to kind of give it a new memory, right? It's been clamped in there for a long time, and you want to loosen the pressure off of the top so that you can remove the actual top of the fork nut here, but have it still pinched by the lower one. So, and this will make the reinsertion easier as well. Inserting the forks can sometimes be a pain in the butt because of the tightness of the fork clamps. So just giving this a little outward persuasion, and hopefully that'll be enough. Now that the pinch point up here has been loosened and untensioned a little bit, these nuts here are supposed to be at 20 Newton meters, and so it shouldn't take a lot to pop this off, and it doesn't. Hip hip hooray! So now that I've gotten that loose a little bit, I can just kind of tighten that back down to snug. The point of it being that I'll be able to undo that when the fork is all by itself, and yet it won't leak on me. I don't want to loosen that thing all the way up or a whole bunch and have a bunch of fork oil winding up in places I don't want it. So I'll do the same thing on the other side. Getting to the pinch bolts that are up here turns out to be a little more difficult than I had planned. There's a steering stabilizer that's coming across here and is on either side of these guys, but not by a lot. And then when you get to the piston part on the other side, it is kind of in the way. So certainly the big tool that I was using here doesn't do a great job of getting in there. So I'm going to take this is a T40. See if I'm right. This is a T40. Yeah, this is a T40, and I can get in there with this tool, at least on this side. And we'll see what happens for the other side. So this plastic plate is still a little bit in the way, and if you finagle it a little bit, you can get it out of the way. So these two bolts now are quite loose, and I'm going to do the same spread kind of a thing that I did earlier. I will do with this one, and again I'm gonna try to be good to myself and hang on to the fork and make sure it doesn't just flop out of there on its own. So as I spread it, I'm giving it a little bit of a twist just to see. There we go. There it goes. So just a little twist and a little pull at the same time, and spreading this guy at the same time is getting the job done. Ooh, and just what I didn't want to have happen. It smacked the ground pretty nicely there. Alright, so fork's out, and I think the bottom of it that hit the ground probably isn't too big of a deal, because it's a pretty solid piece of metal there that's for holding the axle. But there you have it. There's the right fork. The right fork on the BMW F850GS reportedly is the only fork that has actual valving and compression and damping mechanics in it. And my right fork is the seal that broke. I tried doing a seal saver, that didn't work for me, and so still leaking fluid. And I did take some really hard hits on this trip up to Washington in some bad ruts that slammed it all the way to to its end point and then some. So so you can see that the dust seal, I have removed the dust seal already on this, trying to do the seal saver. Even though the left fork is not leaking, I'm going to take it off in order to do a little investigation and figure out what the heck's inside there, and figure out if I can just replace the spring easily, or if I've got to get seals and everything else, which I'm hoping not to have to do. The removal of the left fork is just like the right, with one exception. And that exception is that the steering damper that's in there, right, runs across the fork, and it runs across the area where those bolts are. What I happen to notice is that when I'm at full lock stop on the left, I actually wind up with that piston not being in the way, which is super. So I think I'm going to be able to do this without any super extra special human efforts compared to the other side. And that's just by virtue of the fact that, and maybe it's by design, but if you take the steering all the way to the far left, you wind up with having some clearance by just having the rod that's in the way. I was hoping to not have to take a steering damper off. I've never done that before, and don't particularly want to complicate this job if I don't have to. Alright, so there's plenty of slop in there. So I'll grab my large screwdriver again and give it a pry. It's starting to break free. There we go. Hang on tight. It didn't go banging on the floor like the other one did. There we go. Nice. Alright, so there we have the left fork. And this is the one that does not have a broken, busted seal. So once I had both of them off, I was able to take just a quick, hand measurement kind of thing of the weight, and the left fork is definitely lighter than the right fork. It's not outrageous, which I suppose makes some sense for valving and stuff that's not in the left fork. That seems to be probably the case.